And so anyway, they're coming, and they've never been to Alabama, but their mother, Marie Weaver is her name, had moved to Baltimore and Washington D.C. before, had been married, and they've had 3 children. And the 2 of them are coming, 2 sons. And so their grandfather passed away in 1939. Her first child, a daughter named Patricia, was born in 1943. My friend John was born in 45, and then there's another son who's named after Dr. Weaver, his name is George Weaver Haywood. And so they're coming, it's pretty significant. I started out with wanting to just do a kind of an informal thing with my friend and show him around, and then I went to this library and talked to these people, and now it's become an event. And so, so that's an invitation to any of you. I really appreciate anybody that wants to come. That would be really appreciated. So I have these invitations for people if they're interested. And the last thing I'll just real quickly, 2 days later is, which this event goes on every year, is the celebration of the 51st Greene County celebration of what they call Freedom Day, which is the day that Greene County won a special election on July 29th, 1969. Spider Gordon, who came here and spoke, he's one of the ones that particular program, and this newspaper will tell you everything you need to know about that.
Thank you, Monty. Any other announcements? Yes.
I run a local paving group. I have for many years, although it's been much diminished, especially after COVID started. But deciding to get back together and start growing numbers again, I'm trying to work, I'm going to start trying to work us in with Cup Swoop and get your people, my people together and have much more unity and whatnot.
That's great. Thank you. Susan. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Susan.
Well, speaking of cups, tonight is the full Augusta, and we're Birmingham is hosting it this time.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to make it up there tonight, but if anyone wants to go, but we will be doing August, and that is August 19th.
Okay. Thank you, Ash. Susan.
First of all, I want to thank everybody for coming last night. It was a wonderful occasion. We don't have more of these. Be together and community, and music, and poetry, and reading to it. Who knows? Who knows? Somebody left this wonderful bottle of wine. I took home last night. I felt guilty. I really couldn't keep any alcohol around. And I said, I need to bring this back. So the owner of this, I will leave it in the kitchen, please. Another note, I also appreciate the representation at the County Birds Funeral. People there attending, it was a nice send-off. I have a card for Jean and family, and also one for Jackie. Jackie and Jean were here last night, and that was good to see. I just told him home. That's about everyone in this community. So, the cards are here to sign. I don't know where I'm going to put them. I'll put them up here somewhere. Pass them around to all of us. And then the last thing is the August calendar is ready. I'll put it out in the back, out in the foyer, and then you can pick them up. And we'll make sure that we're doing that Sunday as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Susan. The prelude prepares us for the service. Please rise in body and spirit for the lighting of the chalice. Look at the sky. We are not alone. The whole universe is friendly to us and conspires only to give the best to those who dream and work. In the spirit of inclusivity, please welcome your neighbors. Now that you're sitting again, you can stand up again for hymn number 163, The Earth Forever Turning. Our church is supported by those who call our church home and by those who support the efforts of our church to change our world for the better. If this is your first time here, please let the plate pass. We are just happy you're here. We share our cash plate every Sunday with organizations whose work reflects UU values to care for marginalized persons advocate for real and systemic change, defend our environment, and promote justice and equity for all. Today's Split the Plate organization is Temporary Emergency Services.
By the work of our hands and the intentions of our hearts, our love is mutual. Thank you for these gifts.
When we gather in loving community, we remember that we do not travel alone. We share our lives as we light candles and hold each other in meditative thought and reverence. We invite you to come forward, give us your name, and light a candle from the common flame to share any joys or concerns that may be on your mind. Please come.
My name's Monty. I'm going to share my thoughts. There are a lot of scientists in the room. And my thoughts on the most famous persons in the middle of the 1800s, male and female, worldwide, at least in Europe and the United States. The most famous male person, his name was Humboldt. Alexander von Humboldt. And I've been thinking about him because our congregation is now looking to work in the field of environmental justice. The most famous female was actually an advocate for a Unitarian. Her name was Jessie B. Fremont. And Jessie took great care of Thomas Starr King, who statue used to be in the rotunda of the United States until the middle 1980s. There's this Thomas Starr King Seminary at the University of California, Berkeley, which is a Unitarian seminary. And Jessie's husband was an environmentalist. And I've been studying the cosmos, famous book written by Alexander von Humboldt. So not The Cosmos by Carl Sagan, but The Cosmos by Humboldt. And he had kind of a real strong friendship at one time, actually, with Thomas Jefferson, all the way through till he died in 1859, even with Jessie's husband, John Fremont, who was also an environmentalist, but also led to Thoreau and a lot of other environmentalists, including Fremont. They all followed Humboldt's lead in terms of environmental justice.
I'd like to light a candle of gratitude on behalf of the congregation. You may or may not know, well, I mean, you all know that Matthew was our intern for the last year and served us well. You may not know that he was staying at Susan McKee's house the whole time, free of charge, I believe. Anyway, as a small token of our appreciation, the congregation would like to give Susan acknowledge Susan and give her a little something for her graciousness and hosting.
I just want to say a word. Matt, it was a treasure to have Matthew stay with me and to see him grow throughout this year with the help of both congregations. He's safely home, which is in Colorado. He has texted me. He's okay. He had a hard last week because he was in an accident before he left with his car. But I feel very strongly when you give, you receive. And he gave me a lot, and I appreciate that. I also appreciate this. Thank you so much.
I'd like to light one for friends and family who, through sickness, illness, injury, and other problems, need thought and prayers and everything we can try and give to them.
I'm Peter Vischer, and I wanted to mention, since Gene Bird couldn't be here this morning, that we have all lost a friend in his wife, Kathy Bird, who died a week or so ago, and was, many people in the congregation probably don't realize it, was very important in the history of our congregation as well. When they first came, she was active in the small Unitarian group that existed then. She was active in a lot of causes, including the League of Women Voters, that had a lot of youth participation, and we will all miss her.
Debbie Carden, and I have a joy today. A lot of concerns lately, so it's nice to have a joy. 7 years ago today, my son and daughter-in-law were married in this space. So they're celebrating their 7th wedding anniversary, but they're calling it their 13th anniversary because it was their 6th dating anniversary that they got married on. So.
I'm Sue. I was going to mention also Kathy, such a wonderful person, and we'll miss her. And of course, Gene's not here today, but I hope he's doing well. Also, I just wanted to mention that Jackie McKenzie lost her mother, and she had formerly come here a good while ago, but she was really rather young, and I just wanted to mention also, just a concern for Jackie, your thoughts for her.
I would like one final candle for any joys and concerns that remain on our hearts. I believe we have the story for all ages.
Does this work? Okay. I'm not very loud, I'm sorry, and I know last week the drums were probably a big mistake. Sorry about that. Today we're reading something by Mr. Buda, James Buda, Rana Buda. And I hope that someday he gets these published. I think they're absolutely fabulous. It's not working. Thank you. So this is one of 5 stories, that he's written, and it's absolutely wonderful, and I really do think they should be published someday. So this one is called Superstar and the 5 black holes. Meet Superstar, the most famous star in the Milky Way galaxy. Superstar lives in the starverse, an imaginary universe where all stars and planets can talk and sing, and single stars can leave their normal orbits if they want to. Superstar solves galactic mysteries and protects the Milky Way galaxy from evildoers. Wish our boys were here today. One day, Superstar told his deputy, Top Star, of one of his scariest encounters. Superstar knew that fighting one black hole can be tough. 5 was going to be especially hard. We need help, he said to Sheriff Starfield. He went to Super Red, the biggest red star in the Milky Way. I can try to help you, said Super Red, because I'm a lot bigger than they are. But he wasn't sure. He'd never fought black holes before. Black holes be gone, said Super Red, but they just ignored him. We'll eat you, they said. Oh no, said Super Red, I can't stop this. The hole started drawing gases from his outer layers. So they're getting him. Super Red had to leave. He lost some of his mass to the black holes, but only a small amount. We need a new plan, said Superstar to Sheriff Starfield. Then he had an idea. So the black holes are, can you see it, Isabella? They're starting to consume. Superstar went to Joe's Galactic Cake Restaurant. The owner was Mr. Gallum, a.k.a. Joe. The only thing big about a black hole is the appetite, said Superstar to Mr. Gallum. My plan is to plant signs luring the black holes to a feast. The black holes were coming. So some of us, I think, in the church can relate to these, but probably the children wouldn't get it. Eat at Joe's, black holes welcome, delicious star cake, Beetlejuice. Slip saw the signs. Let's go to this restaurant and eat everything there first, he said. Then we'll finish off the spiral arm. Superstar saw this and thought, my plan is working. So they're at Joe's restaurant, some big tables. The black hole sat at an empty table. Slip saw Mr. Gallum and said, feed us or we'll eat you. The customer is always right, said Mr. Gallum. First have some Beetlejuice, compliments of the house. No, don't do it. The black holes took the drink, not suspecting that they had been drugged. They quickly fell asleep. You were right. Don't do it. Yeah, it's good for us if they do, though. When they woke up, they found themselves in galactic prison. Curses, said Slip. Superstar outsmarted us. Sheriff Starfield thanked Superstar. A job well done, he said. Top Star thanked Superstar for telling the great story. See you later, he said. Okay, said Superstar. Back to defending the galaxy. The end. Until next time. Thank you. Thank you.
Our member talk, or not our member talk, but our talk this morning is by our astronomer, Dr. Ron Vuda. He's written many books, including children's stories. Astronomy Professor Emeritus at UA. Ron, join us.
I hope you all enjoyed that story because it was written 20 years ago by my daughter, Katie, when she was 6 or 7 years old. So it's our connection to the past. Oh, and s- um, my purpose here today is to discuss the fate of humanity, but I'm going to do it from the point of view of the fact that I'm a new granddad, right? My granddaughter was born just 5.5 months ago, and she'll be my age in the year 2094. That is, it'll be nearly the 22nd century when she's my age, and so and my other daughters, Sarah is 33, and my younger daughter is now 20, almost 27, and they make me think about the fate of humanity, and I figure somebody needs to think about it, because if we don't think about it, if we don't think about, oh yes, I'm supposed to speak with intent. So don't let me speak without my speech therapy telling me that this is that you all can hear me. Can you hear me back there, Sue? Okay. Now, I've talked about this subject before, the fate of humanity. It was inspired by a song, but first, let me say that it's a complex subject, the fate of humanity, and we live in such a complex and technologically advanced world, technologically advanced society, that we can't extrapolate our society to the future. Like, can anybody imagine what it's going to be like in 50 years? Now, in 1952, when I was born, the idea of it, the concept of the internet and a cell phone, I'm not sure people thought about that. I certainly didn't. And we were taught many things about patriotism too, because that was especially during the Vietnam War. And when we look at the technological complexity of today, we can see that society is rather fragile, and it's more fragile than we would like to admit. For many people, there's almost a sense of inevitability that human society cannot be maintained at its current level indefinitely. The needs of humanity are so acute. Still, there's hope. Is there hope for the future of mankind? And this is what I want to say more about. Now, I thought I would start with a song, but let me explain where the song comes from. In 1969 or 1970, my older brother, Larry, he introduced me to an interesting new progressive rock band, which some of you may have heard, especially the older people, called King Crimson. And the album was titled In the Court of the Crimson King. And it's really interesting music. The album cover was incredibly artful. I mean, it was scary, but it was artful. So you have to see it. Because somewhere I have a copy of the album. I couldn't find it. What was interesting about about the music were the extensive use of a musical instrument called a mellotron, and the intriguing and thoughtful lyrics of the songs. And one of these songs is called Epitaph, and this is the one I want to mention today. Epitaph, the music was written by Robert Fripp, Michael Giles, Greg Lake, and Ian MacDonald. And the song had haunting lyrics written by Peter Sinfield. But it was Greg Lake's voice that added a touch of seriousness to it. Now, Greg Lake died in 2016, late 2016. And I gave my first Fate of Humanity talk in January 2017, so it's been 8 years since I gave that talk. Now, it was the death of this fine bass guitarist that prompted my interest in talking about the fate of mankind. Greg Lake was actually better known as a member of another group. Oh, if only I could play the guitar. I know what I do. His group was called Emerson, Lake, and Palmer. Some of you may or may know that. In that album, his voice is also commanding. Now, I'd like to let you. I'd like to sing Epitaph for you. Anybody's willing to hear? The wall on which the prophets wrote is cracking at the seams. Upon the instruments of death, the sunlight brightly gleams. When every man is torn apart with nightmares and with dreams, will no one lay the laurel wreath when silence drowns the screams? Confusion will be my epitaph as I crawl a cracked and broken path. If we make it, we can all sit back and laugh, but I fear tomorrow I'll be crying. Yes, I fear tomorrow I'll be crying. Between the iron gates of fate, the seeds of time were sown and watered by the deeds of those who know and who are known. Knowledge is a deadly friend if no one sets the rule. The fate of all mankind I see is in the hands of fools. Confusion will be my epitaph as I crawl a cracked and broken path. If we make it, we can all sit back and laugh, but I fear tomorrow I'll be crying. Yes, I fear tomorrow I'll be crying. Crying. That's we're gonna end it here. It's a beautiful song. Really, if you hear the mellotron. Well, anyway, that's the best I could do. So now, if you think about that song, it's kind of haunting. The fellow who wrote the song, he's not completely pessimistic about the future of mankind, but he's worried about it. So I feel like this song kind of speaks for me. Like, why would I be less pessimistic than anyone else, or more, for example? Let me just say that, here. I say here that the reason Epitaph came back to me after nearly 50 years, right? The song came out in the late 60s. It's a really old song. Is that line, the fate of all mankind is in the hands of fools. And even though Epitaph is only a song, the thoughtful lyrics combined with recent events do not seem to be mere artistic license. Once elected, for example, a new president is given the so-called nuclear codes. Now, this would not necessarily be a cause for concern, except for the fact that perhaps that new candidate is not a man of knowledge. He may not be a man of restraint, or he may not be a man of quiet introspection. And instead, he comes across as dangerously ignorant with a clear desire to squash his enemies. And to drive wedges not only between Americans, but even our allies. And Mr. and the candidate has sold himself as a successful billionaire champion of the common man. Wow. And this approach worked to get him elected the first time, but in order to keep his supporters fired up, he needs enemies to focus their and his ire upon. One of these enemies is the media. Another enemy is the immigrants. Now, okay, that was a mouthful. Now, all of this makes me ask, will man be consumed in the future by his ignorance or by his hubris? Do we have an inalienable right to immortality as a species? And let me look at this first from a more dangerous and more likely perspective, where the fate of humanity is determined by the collective behavior of people. But then it may also be determined by something else that is completely independent of people, like an asteroid could hit the Earth. That could spell the doom of humankind. So let me just, okay, now to begin, or we've begun. We all know that human beings, us, can be phenomenally self-destructive. We know this. That is, people engage in practices that they know are harmful or potentially harmful to their lives, their families, even their communities, but do them anyway. For example, some people smoke, they drink, they drug or text message their way to an early death. And it's not to criticize people who do that, because sometimes it's difficult. Life can be difficult, but in any case, they can do those things to an early death. And also in Hollywood movies in the 40s and 50s, smoking came across as really cool, did it not? I mean, Humphrey Bogart didn't not smoke. He probably smoked, and he was the coolest male actor of his time, apparently. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe he didn't smoke, but I bet he did. Anybody who was somebody smoked. By the 1960s, however, science had shown that smoking is extremely harmful to one's health. And the secondary smoke is almost as dangerous. And this shows that science can take us from a path of self-destruction to a longer and better life. And nevertheless, if the usual vices don't get people, other aspects of human character can work against us. And most troubling, since time immemorial, there have existed people in this world who can't find anything better to do with their time than to dream up ways of hurting other people. It just seems like people try and think of the more dastardly they can batter other people, the better for them. And a majority group of people in the area can get it into their heads that the mere existence of another group of people, another smaller group, for example, a minority group, is a threat to their values, their livelihoods, to everything they believe in, especially if that small group seems to have more presence and more influence out of proportion to their numbers. They decide that drastic measures are needed to confront the threat, and almost inevitably, that will lead to the worst crimes imaginable. The idea is severe punishment, often for being nothing more than different from the perpetrators, is somehow justified. Now, Nazi Germany is a prime example where millions of innocent people could not protect themselves from the unbelievable amount of hate emanating from the country's leadership. The Nazis decided that all of Germany's problems were caused by the excessive influence of people known as Jews. And using propaganda on a scale unheard of before, the hate of the Nazi leadership flowed with relative ease into the German populace. And the German populace went along with the program in part because of the strength of pre-existing anti-Semitism. Now, no member of the targeted group was immune to the depths of depravity reached by those who were put in charge of eliminating the Jewish problem. Women and children were not spared. An elite group of professional killers would go into helpless villages after a Nazi sweep, round up the village's Jewish residents, and murder them in cold blood. I've been thinking about this for years. Imagine you're in one of those villages, and suddenly these people with guns just start arriving in large numbers. They start shooting people. That happened in Ukraine. Well, anyway, the bizarre thing about the perpetrators of these crimes is that they seem to have never imagined being on the receiving end of the punishment they were meting out. They could not. They had no empathy for their victims, and they wouldn't admit that they would not like to be the focus of such hatred themselves. You could turn the situation around. Now, after years of anti-Jewish propaganda, they succeeded in dehumanizing their victims. And if the fate of humanity depends only on what humans do, then this lack of empathy some people have for their fellow human beings could eventually spell the doom of civilization. And that's, I think, the way Chief Justice Robert Jackson put it when he talked to, because he wrote he was the chief American counsel at the Nuremberg trials, and he gave the incredible opening and closing statements, which I highly recommend, which you can find online. I highly recommend anybody, if you can read them, to read his opening and closing statements, because it's really something. And feeling empathy for one's fellow man is like practicing the golden rule. If you do not want to be treated a certain way, then accord your fellow man the same courtesy. Now, 8 years ago, I was concerned about several things. It seems like a long time ago, too. First is the rise of the group known as ISIS, a terroristic army that sprang out of the instability of post-war Iraq. And I hate to remind people of it, but because they haven't been in the news lately, but they're still there. After the removal of Saddam Hussein and the Baathists who supported him, the country of Iraq was left with a leadership vacuum that could not be cured by the propped-up U.S.-supported democratically elected government. As nice as it seemed for a while when elections were taking place and Iraqis would show off their ink-stained fingers, this could not contain the lingering animosities in the region. It's like it was there, and something brought it out. Maybe it's beneath the surface of every group of people. There's things like that. Now, what happened after American troops left Iraq was indeed tragic. The ancient animosities, combined with many unemployed former Baathists, erupted like pus from a bulging boil. I hate to say it. And it led to a horrendous movement of mass murder cloaked in the guise of an extreme form of Islam. The goals of this movement have been nothing short of total domination, not only of Iraq, but of the entire Middle East, under the rule of a caliph. And the caliphate is a 7th century form of Islamic government, would have no room for anyone who would not versed in the version of Islam that the ISIS leadership preferred. And their war became a vicious attack on apostasy. That is not believing the right things. That's what I think that's what that means. The group promoted. The group's demand was conversion or death. You either convert to their faith or you died. And the group also promoted the subjugation of women. And the forced wearing of burqas, and eliminating the education of girls. And ISIS has become essentially, it became at the time a nightmare with 7th century jihadists riding like a barbarian horde out of a time window to the 21st century with access to 21st century weapons. Okay. Well, this is going to be more upbeat as I go along. It's going to have a low point, and then it's going to go up again. Now, even so, did ISIS merit such concern with regard to the fate of humanity? Like, after all, they did not hold the power of a state, and therefore they cannot engage in a war the way Germany did in the 30s. They have no air force or navy, and so how far could their movement go? Well, they were extremely dangerous because they knew how to use the internet to spread propaganda. And that brings us to something that we didn't appreciate during earlier times, is the internet as a way of recruiting. To instill fear, they would post their brutal murders and videos on social media. And they would carry out bombing campaigns against countries, usually, and they would select soft targets, right? Places where the body count would be high. The goal of the attacks was a high body count. And when successful, the perpetrator got labeled a soldier of the caliphate. Often the perpetrator is a suicide killer who blows him or herself up in a crowded area. Now, what do such events imply about the fate of humanity? The existence of such extreme sentiments, coupled with the widespread proliferation of nuclear weapons, is a recipe for disaster. And people who dream of high body counts, who would see the use of nuclear weapons to kill millions of people to be nothing less than God's will. To them, who cares what happens to infidels? They must pay the price for their apostasy. And there can be no doubt that introducing nuclear weapons into the current 20th century fights would have a devastating effect. So what can be done to prevent this? Now, of course, first and foremost, such weapons cannot be allowed to fall into the hands of people who would use them out of spite. And you know there are people out there who would do that. To score political points, placing such weapons into the hands of fools is see where I'm putting that in, would be a colossal mistake. Thus, constant vigilance is required to fend off such a menace. Another issue that people need to care about the fate of civilization. They really do. There can be no doubt that they have to see the modern world as something worth defending rather than destroying. They have to see that. And we want our children to live in a better world than we were born into, with more opportunities than we had. ISIS did not see things that way. Now, let's go to some other things that could affect the fate of humanity. While nuclear disaster is a very real threat to humanity, there are other ways that man's right to immortality could be compromised. The Earth is a large planet, terrestrial planet, not the biggest planet, but it's a large terrestrial planet. And it has limited resources, right? It's at some point, the resources are going to be strained. And according to a website, the current population of the world is 7.5 billion people. And almost 3 times what it was in 1952, the year I was born. It's hard to believe. Overpopulation could have an impact on the fate of humanity as a whole. All the means of life, air, land and water, face a major threat from overuse of resources by the expanding needs of humanity. And as much as I enjoy those perks myself, the byproducts of technological civilization can be disheartening. One thing that bothers me is light pollution. I want the sky back. I don't know how we can get the sky back. Somebody has to go to Congress and get them to pass bills that let us darken the night sky, as if that's an important problem. Now, it's important to me, but to a lot of people it isn't important. The irony of light pollution is that the technological means of reducing it significantly and affordably actually exist. But the problem is that not enough people speak out in favor of dealing with the issue. And if you recall, Rush Limbaugh, he said light pollution isn't pollution at all. Well, it is, because it's robbing people of something that they need to be able to see. We need to see the Milky Way. We need to know the universe. It's the backdrop of our lives. It's always there. And sometimes what happens out there will impact the Earth. Like a solar flare on the sun was visible just a few weeks ago, and people were out in droves trying to see these things when they reached the Earth's atmosphere, causing the aurora borealis. In my case, I needed to. All it took for me to become an astronomer was that I saw a clear night in 1965 when I was 13 years old. That's all it took. But today, I'm not sure anybody could see such things from where we were in Baltimore. So things have gotten out of hand. We live in a largely throwaway society, too. Did you ever wonder, where does all that stuff go that we see in fast food restaurants? There's endless piles, endless bags of things that have only been used once is a waste. The most troubling thing about this is that people who have the power to do something meaningful about environmental protection cannot imagine being in a situation where pollution is serious. Wealthy people who are not affected were not as affected by lead-contaminated water in Flint, Michigan, as were the poor people who mostly lived in the area. And I used to, and my family once lived in the area just like Flint, Michigan. And in 1961, we moved to Hopewell, Virginia. Is that name ring a bell to anyone? It had a DuPont chemical factory. And it was just, we had to breathe terrible air every day in that place. It was so awful. Now, I haven't checked if they've done anything about that, but the regulations, all we hear is that there's too many regulations. There's clearly not enough, I think, for many issues. Well, anyway, so that kind of thing is difficult. It's difficult. I say here that isn't environmental protection good for everyone? It ought to be, but some people don't see it that way. If they see it as the bottom line is profit motive. The bottom line is make the most money. And sometimes you have to do that against the environment, which is sad. Now, while the behavior of people over the long term will likely be the ultimate factor deciding the effect of humanity, deciding the fate of humanity as a whole, rest assured that our species will not live forever. Even the dinosaurs, one of the most successful groups of land animals that ever lived, eventually went completely extinct after nearly 150 million years. Now, can you imagine humanity living on this planet, a technologically advanced civilization, for 150 million years? It just doesn't seem likely, does it? It seems like we are not equipped for long-term population of this planet. But could we last for maybe 100,000 years? Would that be asking too much? Because that's what we're going to probably have to ask for if we want to find aliens living on other planets. If we want to find beings like us who live on other planets, and those planets are hundreds or even thousands of light years away, the probability of us finding them is going to increase the longer that the lifetime of that civilization. So if these civilizations don't last more than 100 years or 200 years, which is possible, then searches for alien beings will fail. It will fail. We will not find them because the probabilities are just too low for seeing things that don't last more than 100,000 or more years. Well, anyway, so let me see what else I had here. And then the sun. If that doesn't do it, if something else doesn't do it, we could have the sun's going to become a red giant in about 5 billion years, 6 billion years. And that'll put an end to the Earth for sure. And the sun will expand to 100 times its current size. And then it's going to become a red giant the second time, where it's going to be more than 200 times bigger than it is now. And the Earth will be in the sun eventually. So that is the ultimate fate of the Earth, to become a part of the sun. And then the sun will become a white dwarf. And we can read that star story we haven't read yet on how stars become white dwarfs. Okay, so anyway, let me see if I have, I think I'm going to stop here. Let me, I'll read my closing statement. In closing, the one thing that gives me hope for the fate of humanity is the resilience people have for standing up to the negative forces within and among us. Human beings, while capable of great destruction, are also capable of doing great things and positive things. And I think of some of the things that I think of is the beautiful music that's been composed by human beings. I'm particularly thinking of the morning song by the Peer Gynt. I don't know much about the background of the Peer Gynt, but the morning song, when they bring the whole orchestra in, I just think that the fate of humanity is to survive, because humans can do great things, and great and positive things. And civilization will only disintegrate if we allow it to do so. It is up to the older generations to continually set good examples for younger ones. And our country can still be a force for good in the world for a long time if we are vigilant. But ultimately, the fate of humanity can depend on a variety of things, like the triumph of good over evil, of knowledge over ignorance, of effective use of the world's resources over ineffective use, and how effectively or ineffectively people combat the urge to use nuclear weapons, or forces beyond humanity's control. Maybe the reason we haven't found evidence of other technologically advanced civilizations is that those societies destroy themselves before they reach the pinnacle. I'm hopeful that this is not the case. I have a quote by a famous Nazi named Albert Speer. Do you all know him? Books have been written about him. He's called the good Nazi. He admitted that he served 20 years in prison after he was sentenced to Nuremberg. The thing about it is he was obviously an intellectual. He was not like the typical Nazi. And he said, "A nation that believes in its future will never perish." And he was concerned about the proliferation of nuclear weapons. And he convinced, he saw to it that Hitler's order on destroying Germany did not get carried out. So he was not a Nazi. I mean, he was a Nazi, but he was perhaps intelligent enough to know that he did wrong. It was wrong for him to join that group. But I believe he's right when he says a nation that believes in its future will never perish. Having a future means preparing for it and going into it. And I think people need to do that. So, well, let me see if I had anything else. I wrote down a list of the changes since 1952. And I want you to tell me if I've missed anything. I noticed that the internet and search engines are one thing. Cell phones are another. Rock music. Maps via GPS technology, we use that today. 1 unit to heat, we have 1 unit that can heat a house and cool a house efficiently. There's LED lighting, right? We don't use necessarily the old lights. TVs that are so big, nobody would even believe a TV could be that big. We have consolidation of companies, as my wife mentioned to me. We have online databases of everything. We have 4-track to 8-track cassettes, CDs, iTunes, Spotify. We've gone to the moon and back, and maybe the era of space exploration was developed. We may be going to nearby stars, and we may be the glorious paradox that Charlton Heston says in the movie, at the beginning of the movie, Planet of the Apes. So I'm going to conclude by saying I'm hopeful that humanity will survive. But for the sake of my daughters, I want us to be the good guys. I don't want us to be the bad guys who do things to our own people, much less other people. So that's what I'm aiming for. Thank you. My wife said, if anybody can think of anything else I can put on my list of things that have changed since 1952, let me know. Yeah, okay? Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Ron. Lots and lots of food for thought. Please stand as you're willing and able for hymn number 95, There Is More Love Somewhere. Thank you, Ken. That was so uplifting. May our lives be reflections of the beauty, peace, and joy that is possible in the world. And may the love we find in this place sustain us as we go our separate ways. Postlude. Thank you, Ken. You always top yourself. You do. The service is ended. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you for sharing space. It is a joy that I find every Sunday to be here with everyone. Please stay for coffee, conversation, and there's some sweets and snacks to munch on, and please go in peace.